The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time was initially released on November 21st, 1998. Hold up, it's older than me? Oh no. On October 26, 2021, it was added to the Nintendo Switch Online expansion pack, and we're reviewing it ahead of reviewing Majora's Mask on Sunday. Majora's Mask also came out before I did, so for a double whammy of existential crisis on Sunday, make sure you're subscribed. Before we get into the review, I'd like to give you a frame of reference of where I sit with the Zelda franchise as a whole. I played Ocarina of Time a lot as a kid, but never completed it. I've played the very fun start of Wind Waker, and seen a majority of someone else playing through Twilight Princess. I've never had the fortune of playing Majora's Mask. I have played and completed Link's Awakening on Switch and Breath of the Wild, with Breath of the Wild being one of my top 5 favourite games of all time. Ocarina of Time has been heralded as one of, if not the greatest game of all time since its inception. I've been playing since I was a kid and was excited to venture back into Hyrule. How does the game hold up after 20 years? Does it translate well to Nintendo Switch? And most importantly, is Ocarina of Time worth your time? This game has held up marvellously, but it suffers from a lot of common N64 gameplay issues. Let's start with the good. Link feels fun to move, the world is engaging to explore, and the challenges feel fantastic to conquer. Gameplay has a solid depth and learning curve. You've got a lot more moves than your standard running and fighting. Link can roll, sidestep, climb, push things, and much more. Fighting has the same depth, where you start out by only being able to swing your sword and lift your shield, but you soon gain some extra abilities. The game has a great sense of adventure about it, and the world does a fantastic job of feeling much bigger than it actually is. If you look hard enough, there are always secrets to discover. We're going to touch more on this in our art direction section, but every area in the game manages to feel unique in both look and gameplay. Death Mountain is a vastly different space to play in than Zora's Domain and so forth. It kept the game from getting stale and had me looking forward to whatever new things I would come across. All of this is exemplified when you go 7 years into the future, and every area has a new field to discover. The previously friendly Kokiri Forest becomes a hostile place, and the once lively Hyrule Castle town becomes a ghost town. This is a great tie between narrative, gameplay, and art direction, on top of making you excited to explore more. I also really like that previous Zelda knowledge came into play. It was easy to know how the world connects together because I've played Breath of the Wild, which shares a similar overall world layout. When Navi popped up and told me I needed to go to Zora's Domain, I knew where to go instinctively. Speaking of, Navi isn't nearly as annoying as she's made out to be. The soundbite is a bit grating, but she very rarely interrupts you unless you specifically ask her to. Now we're starting to blend into the bad. We'll save the big ones for last, but I do have a few small issues with the gameplay. I really don't like that you spawn all the way back at either Kokiri Forest or the Temple of Time every single time you exit the game. It feels needless to have the player walk all of the way back to where they were. However, there are fast travel options to negate this, and if you're in a dungeon, you spawn back at the start of the dungeon when you reload. The camera is very finicky. It can be learnt and wielded, but the process is slow. I will say that it is much better than the camera seen in Mario 64, but just barely. I do like that all you have to do to orient is point Link in the direction you want to look and hit the left trigger, but the camera does have a frustrating mind of its own sometimes. The first person camera is fine, but controls on the joystick are far too sensitive and it makes aiming a pain. The camera mostly becomes an issue in combat, especially in combat with fast moving enemies. It is impossible to see enemies that are behind you, and that's before you get to Z targeting. Z targeting is the worst system I've come across in a long time. Good grief. I don't think that I've ever seen a targeting system that just has a mind of its own and it works to its own detriment. With one enemy at a time, it's fine. It allows you to easily engage with the one enemy. However, with more than one enemy, you are bound to get hit and possibly killed, as switching between targets is very hard. Your cursor will jump between targets if they are clustered together, and there is so much room for something to go wrong. Tracking flying enemies is a disaster, as they usually attack fairly fast and you can't pan the camera up. If enemies move out of your crosshair too quickly, then you just lose them and have to retarget. Finally, there is a range to the system. You have to be close enough to an enemy to target them. In one boss fight, trying to target multiple boss parts whilst being hailed by attacks was a disaster. It really is that bad. The game has aged marvellously in so many areas. For the most part, it feels great to control, fun to explore, and there is a great melding of mechanics, but camera issues and Z targeting bring the game down. Still, I am so impressed with how well the gameplay package as a whole holds up, and as such, we're giving the gameplay a 4 out of 5. Ocarina of Time may not have graphical fidelity in its favour, but the art direction here is phenomenal. The game makes so many great choices to make its art direction far more than the sum of its parts. As said in gameplay, each area of the game has a very distinct feel. Hyrule Field feels grand and full of adventure, despite being practically empty and undoubtedly tiny. The Goron City and Zora's Domain are both primarily rocky areas, but through different colourings and the prominence of water in Zora's Domain, they both feel like completely different realms. The fairy fountains feel otherworldly, and Jabu Jabu's belly feels like an organic, living creature. It is magnificent that areas of such simple fidelity manage to encapsulate so much life. Then there's the music, the childlike wonder of Kokiri Forest, the bustling of the market theme, the calmness of Lon Lon Ranch. If you don't feel a sense of adventure upon hearing the Hyrule Field theme, then you need to consult your doctor. And yet, the art direction keeps on giving once you go into the future. Hyrule Castle Town loses all colour and life and becomes a tormented hellscape. The fun market music is replaced by silence and the moans of the re-dead. All of the colour is sapped away and Death Mountain looms overhead. In the Temple of Time, you are told how Ganon destroyed the world. Once you step outside, you get to experience it for yourself. I am floored. Art direction that withstands 2 decades of technological progress deserves the highest praise, and as such, gets the full 5 out of 5. Games like Ocarina of Time have to rely on 2 narrative facets. First, there is the grand main story, and then there's the smaller stories that flesh out the world. Ocarina of Time starts out fairly simple. As young Link, you need to save the world from Ganon with the help of Zelda. It is enough to get you going. On your adventure, you'll meet lots of different people and help them with the problems they're facing, like a true hero. Then the plot shifts, and you are flung 7 years ahead. Ganon won, the sages are scattered, and there's someone mysterious named Sheik. You left Hyrule for those 7 years, and now you get to see how it affected everyone before you can save the day for good. You are constantly reminded of just how screwed everyone is if you can't beat Ganon. Then we have the smaller stories. The guard who just wants to buy his kid a mask, the giant Goron who spends 7 years working on a giant sword, the hard-working farmhand who ends up owning the farm, or the annoying Zora princess and her connection to the water spiritual stone. The world feels like the stage for a grand tale of good and evil, but there are also plenty of smaller stories to flesh everything out. People after the calamity are just trying to go about their lives, and it all feels very real. Ocarina of Time's narrative does a lot of good in order to show and not tell, and I was always left wanting to see what happened next, even if I already knew the broader twists of the story. We're giving Ocarina of Time a 5 out of 5 for a solid, layered, yet simple narrative. The emulation present on the Switch is fantastic, and we experienced no bugs whilst playing. We don't usually mention graphical fidelity, but the game looked very crisp. We play on a 50-inch 4K display, and the package as a whole looked great throughout. You're getting free save slots to mess around with options to copy or erase files. There are options to create suspend points, which serve as additional save points. We didn't find much use for these, but they are nice to have. Options are very limited. You can choose your audio preset and toggle Z targeting between toggle and hold. We much preferred hold as it felt more natural. There's also a bar to check your brightness, because apparently that's how we did it back in the 90s. This is a tough one, because settings just weren't at the caliber they are today back then. I didn't come into the settings menu expecting anything really. Overall, I just wanted a polished game. My big wish ended up being widescreen options for the emulator as a whole. I'm not sure how possible it would be, but playing with all the stuff on screen didn't do any favours for immersion. Being able to get rid of that, change the sidebars to full black, and a widescreen toggle if you so wish, would have gone a long way. Again, scoring this is very hard. On a technical level, the game runs great. Load times are almost instant and we ran into no issues, but options are severely limited. If the game does something that annoys you, like having really slow, unskippable text, you can't do anything about it. At the end of the day, we try to rate everything on the same scale, regardless of release date, and as such, we're giving Ocarina of Time a 4 out of 5 on our spec scale due to its fantastic technical performance, but lacking settings. Rounding out this review are some solid points for commitment. Hard drive footprint is nice and reasonable. You can't install games separately, you have to go all or nothing with the N64 emulator, but it only totals out at 599 MB, which is great. Play sessions can be tailored to whatever you see fit. You can save at any time and the game provides lots of downtime for you to take a break. There are no massively long sections where you cannot put the game down. My only niggle here is that saving and quitting takes you back to either Kokiri Forest, the Temple of Time, or the start of the dungeon you were in. But traversing Hyrule doesn't take that long and there are fast travel options available for you to learn to use. It's not a big enough issue to take a point off. You might be waiting for us to make a point about how you have to pay extra for these games, but our channel is strictly focused on the games, not the service they are brought to you by. For the record though, this delivery system sucks, Nintendo. I'm grateful to be able to play and review these games as part of my channel, but seriously, what were you thinking? Overall, Ocarina of Time has a solid commitment score. It's very easy to fit this into your free time, but it is a fairly long game, so if you only have a few hours a night, it might take you a while to get through. We're rounding out this review with a 5 out of 5 on our commitment scale. The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time is a triumph. There are so many reasons that this game is heralded to be as great as it is, and it delivers. The world manages to feel more engaging and alive than those 100 times bigger and more detailed. A game that can stand the test of time for 2 decades and still come out on top is really special. There are some limitations, sure, and Z targeting is now my least favourite thing in existence next to spiders and my own reflection, but the game really is far more than the sum of its parts. Is it better than Breath of the Wild? No, not by a long shot, but I'm being serious when I tell you that I really did feel that Breath of the Wild magic again, and it only feels fitting that I'd feel it here. If I were actually, alive in 1998 to bear witness to Ocarina of Time releasing, I truly believe my head would have exploded.